There are refugees among us. They don't carry flags or signs. They are standing right beside us in the market checkout lines. And the war that they've been fighting, it will not be televised, but the story of their need for love is written in their eyes. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors of the heart. Can you see through their disguises? Can you hear what words won't tell? Some are losing faith in heaven, 'cause their life's a living hell. Is there anyone to help those who have nowhere else to flee? For the only arms protecting them belong to you and me. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors of the heart. Can you feel the pleas of the refugees for safe harbors of the heart? So in this time of uncertainty, let us remember the example of the man we came here to celebrate. For love rights all wrongs. Love heals all wounds. Love reveals all truth. And love releases all fear. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors of the heart. For safe harbors of the heart. Can you feel the pleas of the refugees for safe harbors of the heart? When her mother named her Constance, she had no intention of ever calling her Connie. Constance was a solid name, a name with substance and dignity. But Connie, well, Connie was just fluff. Now, a lot of young girls would have welcomed a friendly, "Hi, Connie," from her friends at school, or at the very least, would have acknowledged the greeting with a smile. "My name is Constance," she would say, looking and sounding a bit like an old maid librarian with an attitude problem. "I am not a Connie." If it's possible to be obedient to a fault, Constance was. It never occurred to her that anything her parents ever said was not absolutely true. No advice, counsel, instruction, or observation was ever challenged. She tried in every way to be her mother in miniature. This remarkable devotion was an enormous source of pride for her parents, though Constance never knew it. All she knew was that her parents were never wrong. This wasn't true, of course. They didn't teach their only child how to think or dream or feel or wonder or question or choose or discover anything for herself. They believed it was their job as parents to do all that for her, and she let them. When Constance grew up, she became a nurse at Fullerton Hospital. She had never shirked her duties or failed to follow a doctor's orders to the letter, and she had never, ever questioned or challenged anyone in authority at the hospital. Needless to say, doctors loved her, and patients didn't. Yes, Constance Louise Chamberlain always followed the voice of authority, and that is what placed her in an extremely awkward position a few weeks before Christmas. The chief administrator of the hospital had a special request to care for an aging gentleman with psychological problems whose wealthy family was vacationing for the holidays. The inference was that if the hospital provided home health care, the family would make a donation to the hospital when they returned. Now, it wasn't in Constance's nature to defy the authority of Mr. Halifax, the hospital administrator, not to mention the chairman of the board. But just because she wouldn't have said no didn't mean she would have chosen on her own to say yes. The assignment she'd just been given was way out of her comfort zone. During her nurse's training, she had to work in every wing of the hospital for a week or two, and the only two experiences she found unbearable were in the psychiatric ward and the maternity ward. There was some good news, however. With this assignment, she wouldn't have to be involved in all the Christmas activities that took place at the hospital. She had always thought they were such a pain. Not that she was a Grinch or an ogre that hated the season or anything like that. It just was a bit too overdone as far as she was concerned, and so this assignment gave her the perfect escape for what she considered the clutter of the season. How bad could it be, she thought, as she rode the bus home from the hospital. I'll avoid all those people tracking snow down the hall and singing out-of-tune carols. I'll miss those silly staff parties with the gag gifts everyone pretends are so funny. And for the first time in years, I won't have to deal with the season. I'll only have one man to babysit during the day, and the evenings will be mine. No shift work, no nights. Maybe this is what I've always wanted, a real vacation from Christmas. A faint smile came over her face as she thought about it, not realizing that she was on the eve of the most memorable Christmas she would ever know. When Constance arrived at the address she was given, she was greeted by a man who was placing a large Christmas tree in the living room. "Hello, you must be the nurse from Fullerton Hospital. I wanted so much to get the tree up today, so I went Christmas tree shopping. Isn't it a beauty?" Who was this man? He couldn't be the aging uncle mentioned in the telegram. So who was he? He held out his strong but gentle hand. "Everyone calls me Uncle John." Constance prided herself in never staring at anyone. It wasn't polite to stare, but she was, and she couldn't help it. This must be him, her patient. He wasn't anything like what she'd imagined. He looked so normal. He wasn't the old geezer with saliva trickling down the side of his mouth and hair growing out of his ears she had dreamed about last night. He didn't have any tics or affectations. His eyes didn't have that faraway look she had prepared herself to deal with. And his clothes, they were beautifully coordinated and comfortably tailored. His hand was still extended,
and finally she shook it. He gave a warm and reassuring squeeze of the hand and held it a bit longer than she wanted. "You can call me Uncle John, and what shall I call you?" "My name is Constance. Constance Louise Chamberlain." "Constance, eh? Well, you certainly look like a Constance, but don't feel bad. I can see beyond that, and I believe that anyone can recreate themselves if they know where to turn for help. I'll call you Connie Lou." Well, if real life had background music like the movies, right then you'd have heard the kind of music they play when the gunfight's about to begin. Constance's blood was running cold. He had touched a very tender nerve, and she was straining to keep herself in check. How dare he be so critical and so familiar? After all, if anyone needed recreating, it would certainly be him. He was the patient. He was the one with the psychological problems. "Why don't we just call me Nurse Chamberlain or Ms. Chamberlain? I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself properly in the beginning." She was proud of herself for setting things straight so gracefully and for not losing control. "Well, whenever we call you anything, we'll make sure it's either Nurse Chamberlain or Miss Chamberlain. But as for me, I'm going to call you Connie Lou. You see, if I call you Nurse or Ms. or something equally distant and lonely, well, that's all you'll ever be to me. But Connie Lou, aha, there's someone worth getting to know." Constance wasn't weighing her words anymore. "Sir, this isn't a date we're on here. I am a professional, and I don't believe I like the idea of a patient of mine calling me Connie Lou." Uncle John's eyes were always sparkling, but the gleam seemed to turn up a notch. He thought a moment and then replied, "You're right. It's not fair that I tell you what you can call me and then turn around and tell you what I'll call you. You don't have to call me Uncle John just because everyone else does. Call me whatever you like, and I'll call you Connie Lou." "Very well, then," Constance said with a smile born of inner resolve and confidence that she was handling the situation properly. "I'll call you John or Uncle John if you like." "That's the spirit, Connie Lou." Before she had a chance to ask any questions, John excused himself for a moment and left the room. When he returned, he was carrying what looked like a very old, relatively small suitcase made from leather straps and carved wood. Constance had never seen anything like it. "Do you want to know what's in here?" he asked with childlike enthusiasm. "These are the most precious possessions I have on earth. These are my Christmas ornaments." The man's most precious possessions in the world are Christmas ornaments? Constance made an attitude adjustment right then and there. He was quite clearly a man whose mind had gone over the edge. The opening of the ancient Christmas ornament case was a ritual of sorts for Uncle John. He carefully unlatched the cracked leather straps that held the case together, and, as he did, Constance felt something like a little breath of spring enter the room. She couldn't deny it, though part of her wanted to, and she couldn't deny the little girl anticipation she felt either. For the first time in her life, Constance Louise Chamberlain surrendered to the simple joy of wonder. "Which one goes on the tree first?" "This one," he answered without hesitation. He then carefully lifted from the case something that resembled an arched entrance or passageway made of stone. John placed it in the nurse's hands so she could examine it more closely. It was fascinating. It made her think of the kind of doorways people must have entered thousands of years ago. Small as it was, it had been crafted with great attention to detail. It looked like it was made of real stones and mortar. A thick piece of cloth hung where Constance expected to see a door. She asked John about it. "Well, thousands of years ago, it was common to place heavy woven pieces over entrances to serve as doors," he said, sounding like he knew what he was talking about. Then her eyes focused on something that had been painted on the stones above the entrance. It looked like it had been written long ago, in a language she could not understand. "I made this myself," John said proudly. "It's the entrance to the inn where there was no room for Joseph and Mary. This piece always goes on the tree first." Constance took that as her cue to place the ornament on the tree. "Where would you like me to place it?" she asked. "We have to sing first," he answered. Sing what, she wondered. "O little town of Bethlehem, silent night." John read her thoughts. No, Connie Lou, not those. We'll sing the forgotten carols." She turned from her study of the ornaments in her hand and gave John a quizzical expression. "The what?" "The forgotten carols. That's what I call them anyway. They're carols about characters who played supporting roles in the Christmas story that have either been forgotten, overlooked, misunderstood, or ignored." "How did you find these carols?" "Well, to tell you the truth, Connie Lou, they kind of found me. Take the Innkeeper, for example. Now, this was a man who turned away Joseph and Mary, not because he was mean or thoughtless. He was just taking care of business. What haunted him, though, was the feeling that he didn't really do all that he could have done for the pregnant woman." "How do you know this?" hoping for an answer that made sense. "He told me," was his reply. "Sure, that makes sense if you're a crazy person. What do you mean he told you?" Constance felt like getting tough. She wasn't going to get sucked into this nonsense any longer. "He just told me. It was several years after it had happened. I had returned to Bethlehem on a sort of pilgrimage celebrating the birth, and I spent the night in his inn. Then when he found out who I was, he told me his story." "When he found out who you were? Who are you?" "Never mind, I don't want to know." That was certainly honest. She didn't want to know because, well, then the spell he was casting would be broken. She wanted to cling a little longer to the hope that John was what she wanted him to be. But with everything he was telling her, she realized he couldn't be anything other than what Mr. Halifax said he was, an aging uncle with psychological problems. John sat at the piano and started to play. He played well. He played with great feeling. Then, closing his eyes so that he would reflect the spirit of the Innkeeper as he remembered it, he began to sing. "I am a man forgotten. No one recalls my name. Thousands of years will fail to fully erase my shame. But I turned a prophet nicely that day, when I turned the couple away. I turned them away. I didn't sleep that evening, though I'd sold out my place. Somehow I felt uneasy, something about her face. Why did I wish that I'd let them stay? I didn't think they could pay. Or could they have paid? Restless, I left my bedroom. I walked the streets all night, lost in the world I lived in, found by a heavenly light. Staring at one bright star in the sky, I heard a baby cry. I knew where that cry had come from, 'cause I told them where they could go. But I didn't think I could face them
So I walked slowly home, missing my chance to share in their joy. I never saw the boy. He never would condemn me. I did that all on my own. He offered his forgiveness, and ever since then I've known. He lets us choose each hour of each day, if we'll let him in to stay. Let him in. Let him in. Let the joy and the hope begin. Let him in. Let him in. Let the peace on earth begin. And whether it be in your world today, or a crowded Bethlehem inn, find a way, make him room, let him in, let him in, let the joy and hope begin. Let him in, let him in, let the peace on earth begin. Let him in, let him in, let him in, let him in.
When the singing of the first forgotten carol was over, Uncle John arose from the piano, took Constance by the hand, and walked over to the bare Christmas tree. He pointed to the spot on the tree worthy of this ornament. He called the spot the heart of the tree. Constance hung the ornament far enough in that there was no danger of it accidentally falling off. And as she did, she noticed again the strange writing across the top of the ornament. John read her thoughts and answered, "That was the inscription written by the innkeeper over the entrance to his inn shortly before he died. I wanted to preserve it on the ornament just the way my friend had written it. It says, 'Let him in.'" At the stroke of 5, she called a cab and prepared to go home. Her patient was obviously suffering from bouts of delusion, but if today proved anything, it was that he was perfectly harmless. The next day at the mansion, Constance hung her coat and scarf in the hall closet and found a comfortable chair in the main room and waited. Then she heard it. It was clearly coming from upstairs and was coming toward her. It sounded like a wooden flute. The melody was hypnotic, but the actual sound of the instrument was even more so. As the sound got closer, she expected any moment to see Uncle John coming down the stairs, playing whatever instrument was making that remarkable sound. What she didn't expect was a man dressed like a shepherd who lived at the time of Christ. But that's how John looked. The clothes he was wearing were as remarkable as the sound he'd been making. His entrance was so convincing that for a moment Constance didn't think he just looked like a shepherd. She thought he was one. But reality came quickly into focus for the professional nurse, and when it did, she didn't know whether to be concerned for her patient's behavior or amused by it. Contrary to her nature, she chose the latter. As he played his haunting tune, he circled his nurse a few times and then motioned her to follow, Pied Piper style. He guided her to the open case of Christmas ornaments. Continuing to play, he nodded his head toward the ornaments, hoping that Constance would read his thoughts. She saw a beautiful miniature shepherd's flute, like the one John was playing, and she picked it up. It was a remarkable likeness, tiny wooden reeds cut and shaped to look like an ancient pan flute. John continued to play while he marched her toward the Christmas tree. Since his playing made it impossible to speak, he used his eyes and head movement to give her the message that she was to place her little flute on the tree. Constance thought she was playing along beautifully and began to hang the ornament on the tree. Suddenly, John's flute playing sounded like a swarm of angry bees. Constance felt a surge of panic and almost dropped the little flute. What was wrong? What was happening? The state of emergency didn't last long, however. John took the flute away from his lips long enough to say, "Don't put it so close to the other one, Connie Lou. It's a big tree." When it registered in her eyes that Constance knew what he meant, he went on playing. Constance decided it would be wise to hold the miniature flute in a general area of the tree and see if it met with the shepherd's approval before committing herself to hanging it. She first held it in a place due south of the only other ornament yet on the tree, and then she looked to John. He gave her a so-so back and forth nod and played a mediocre note over and over again. She decided to try another spot, much higher and to the right. Victory! The music soared, and she knew she'd found her spot. As she hung the little flute on the tree, her back was to John, so he didn't see her smile from its beginning. But as she turned around, he caught the last piece of it, and it was beautiful. The flock was more than peaceful. The night was dark and deep. The stillness wrapped around me. I drifted off to sleep. And when my friends awoke me, oh, what a tale they had to tell. They said the angels told them about a newborn king. They had a star to guide them. They heard the heavens sing. They said that when they found him, they knew they'd never be the same. Somehow I did believe them, though everything I knew said I should not believe them. This story can't be true, but there was something magic in the air that made me feel as if I had been there. I asked 1,000 questions. Their answers startled me. The more I heard, the more I thought I knew this could not be. And then the struggle started. My head was wrestling with my heart. Why would a God from heaven come to the world this way? Why in a lowly stable would the Messiah lay? I shook my head and asked them to tell the story one more time. And yes, I did believe them, though I'd not seen a thing. I did not go to Bethlehem or hear the angels sing, but there was something magic in the air that made me feel as if I had been there. I knew that as the world moved on through time, there would be more stories just like mine, about the souls who've chosen to believe in something that they never got to see. And do you think you'll join us, though you've not seen a thing? You were not there in Bethlehem to hear the angels sing, but if you feel the Spirit in the air, then just like me you'll know, yes, you'll know that He
was here. He was here. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords was here. He was here. He was here. And he will come again.
The King of Kings was the Lord of Lords. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords was here.
He was here.
The King of Kings.
He was here.
The Lord of Lords.
And he will come again. For he was here. The rhythm of the song, the theme, everything about it was different than anything Constance thought of as Christmas music. But it was doing the very thing her past Christmases had failed to do. It was moving her heart. Uncle John took her hand and walked her over to the sofa where they sat down. "Thank you for letting me share that with you. I love that shepherd." Sitting next to John gave her a chance to feel the fabric of his costume. "Where did you get this material?" she asked. "I've never seen anything like it." "Well, this was his, actually. He told me that he wanted me to have it so I'd never forget his story. And on the day I place the ornament on the tree, I wear his clothes to honor him." Constance wondered what had happened to Uncle John to make him need to create these fantasies. Even though she was not skilled in clinical psychology, she tried to remember her courses on the subject back in college. She dared to ask a few questions in hopes they would help her get a clearer picture of his mental illness. Your friend, this shepherd, he died when?" she asked. "About 42 AD, I believe," he said, straining to remember a detail so long ago. "But you've lived all this time since then, is that right?" "That's right." "Don't you think that's a little unusual?" "A little? It's absolutely incredible. How many people do you know who have been around as long as I have?" His response to her question surprised her. "How long do you think you've been around, Uncle John?" "Oh, I guess it's close to 2,000 years now. I'd say that's more than a little unusual, wouldn't you, Connie Lou?" Yes, I'd say it's unbelievable." "Well, of course it's unbelievable. If it hadn't happened to me, I'd have a hard time believing it myself." "How did it happen that you've been alive all this time, Uncle John?" John's expression grew a bit more serious. Constance thought she may have hit a nerve, and so she watched him very carefully. She had learned in her psychology studies that body language can be very important. "I can't tell you," he finally said. "You can't tell me because you don't want to, or because you don't really know how it happened?" Constance felt very good about her question. "You wouldn't understand. Not now, anyway. So let's just leave it at that." John stood up. Constance immediately recognized his standing as the body language clue she had been looking for. He was obviously uncomfortable talking about this and wanted to escape, but she wasn't about to let him. "What are you running away from, John?" He looked puzzled at her question. Constance took his look as more evidence that she was onto something. She persisted. "What are you running away from?" "I'm not running away from anything." "Oh, yes, you are." "No, I'm not," he fired back. "Then why did you stand up just now?" she said slyly. "Because old shepherd's clothes itch. I'm going to change." He walked out of the room, leaving his psychologist to read that body language any way she wanted. Several moments later, Uncle John rejoined her. "Time we do another ornament," he announced. From his special case of Christmas ornaments, he selected one that looked like a very, very old writing tool. He walked it over to the tree and was about to place it there when something shocked Constance. A thought seized her brain and made her captive to its wishes. She quietly raced to the piano and began pounding on the keys with reckless abandon. When Uncle John's head spun around to see what was the matter, she saw in his eyes
the bewildered panic she'd experienced herself not long ago. When she had his complete attention, and with great dramatic effect, she said, "Don't put it so close to the other one, Uncle John. It's a big tree." Her laughter started as a mischievous little chuckle. Then it swept through her body like wildfire. It hit full strength in her belly, and before she could contain it, she was laughing uncontrollably. It was contagious. John began laughing, but it grew to his own belly laugh simply because his nurse was laughing so crazily. She'd try so hard to stop, but just when she thought she had herself under control, another wave of laughter would overcome her. Tears came to her eyes, her sides ached. It was as if all the laughter of a lifetime was released in one afternoon. She had not planned it, rehearsed it, or even thought about it. It just happened, and it marked her second great surrender in as many days to the innocent joy of laughter. When the laughter ended, Uncle John said, "Connie Lou, I want to tell you about this pen. I received it from a man who told me his story late one evening, many Christmases ago. We were talking about inspiration, where it comes from, why it comes, how it changes us. And he spoke of a time when he felt completely uninspired, without direction, lost. And then he had a dream. In my dream, he told me, I was a very young angel in a very heavenly place when a trumpet was sounded and an announcement made. All the angels were invited to audition for the choir that would announce the holy birth. The excitement and anticipation caused my little angel heart almost to burst. When my moment arrived, I stood before the musical tribune and sang, and sang, and sang. No one interrupted or snickered at me because, well, this was heaven. But I knew immediately that I would not be invited to join the choir for one obvious reason. I couldn't sing. I felt the music, but I couldn't get that feeling to come out of my voice. The grand choir master smiled and nodded to his chief assistant to show me out. "This isn't fair," I pleaded. "If you could hear what is in my heart, you'd let me sing." I ran back toward the choir master and begged him to give me another chance, and as I did, music began to fill the room, and I recognized it, for it was the music coming directly from my tender, innocent heart. As John spoke, Constance heard instruments from an orchestra, faint at first, then loud enough to be in the room with them. How could this be? She had nowhere to turn for answers, and so she surrendered to the music, and it filled her in ways the answers she was seeking never could. All the other angels stood motionless and amazed as they heard the sound. And when my carol to my King was over, the grand choir master stood. "Oh, little one," he said, "you have so much to give, and your time will come. Your time will come." "Then I can't sing with the choir?" I looked for him to change his mind, but he only shook his head and smiled. "You have a different voice, but it will be heard. Centuries from now, it will be heard. It will be heard. More orchestras and choirs than you can now imagine will be giving the music of your heart a voice that will echo through time." It was Handel? This is the pen of George Friedrich Handel? The one he wrote the Messiah with? I can't believe it. No, John corrected her. You won't believe it. There's a big difference. What do you mean? She said a little defensively. You made up your mind a long, long time ago that something like this just could never happen, and so you chose not to believe it. But it doesn't make any sense. Why doesn't it? He asked. Because things like that just don't happen. She was getting angry. Says who? Says my mother. She couldn't stop the words from racing out of her mouth, and when she said them, she sounded just like the schoolgirl she once was. She knew John could have made a field day out of a response like that. She was waiting for him to tease her, the way the kids used to do. But instead of attacking, he retreated. Connie Lou, I'm sorry. You don't have to believe me. There's nothing wrong with you because you can't believe me. The most natural thing in the world is to question things and want to know why. You haven't failed. You haven't done anything wrong. You're my friend, and I apologize for sounding like I was judging you. Please, please forgive me. No one had ever asked Constance's forgiveness before, so she wasn't sure how to give it, and no one had ever told her that she was okay. People had told her she was competent, but she'd never been told it was okay to feel and question and challenge and disagree with an adult. So she didn't know how to act. Uncle John then took the pen that he claimed once belonged to Handel, and he dipped it in a little ink bottle that was on the ornament case. He then wrote something on a piece of paper, blew the fresh ink dry, and handed it to Constance. Before she could read it, he told her it was time for his nap, and he left the room. His note read, Connie Lou, I'm afraid you're stuck with me, and I hope you will learn to like me someday, because you can't make me not like you. John. Constance held her note, written with the same pen that supposedly wrote the glorious music of the Messiah. She still couldn't believe it had, but she could believe one thing. Today, it had written something, oh, so beautiful. It started snowing that afternoon, and Constance found herself drawn to the overstuffed chair by the window so she could watch. Although she had a great deal on her mind, the falling snow gave her an excuse to think about nothing for a while. It was a soft and gentle snow the kind that brings quiet. She gazed out the window and watched the ground become a thick white carpet. It was soft and peaceful and safe and warm, and she hoped nothing would disturb her for a while. Through the lace curtains of falling snow, she saw some children starting to build a snowman. Among them was an older woman who looked like she was having as much fun as the children. Constance was amazed that a woman that old would be so childlike, so carefree, so much fun. What a wonderful surprise! It's Sara! Had John not spoken, Constance would not have noticed that he had entered the room. He tapped on the window and tried to get the attention of the woman playing in the snow with the children. "Oh, Connie Lou, you have to meet her." Then he opened the window and called, "Sara, Sara, come in out of the cold." The old woman was helping the children place the head on the snowman. "In a minute, John, in a minute." "You're going to adore this woman, Connie Lou. Everybody does. She's one of my favorite forgotten carols."
She had a way with children, and she molded them like clay. She found the greatness in them all, and she nurtured it each day. Though she never had been married or had children of her own, she could make the toughest child be good. And so she would not be misunderstood. My friend Sara told her story every chance she could.
Uncle John greeted Sara at the door with a warm embrace, and he walked her to the fire. "Connie Lou, this is my dear friend Sara. Sara, this is my new friend, Connie Lou Chamberlain." "My name is Constance. I'm really not a Connie," she said out of habit. "How long have you and John been friends?" "Forever. Well, not exactly forever. Just seems that long. What's it really been, John? About 1900 years?" Constance shrieked inside. Oh, no, she's crazy too. Constance tried to calm herself so she could ask a few more questions. What brings you to this part of the planet?" Constance didn't know what else to say. "Oh, I try to look up John every few hundred years to see if he still remembers me and my carol." John smiled at his old friend. "I remembered, Sara. I always remember." Then something very, very curious happened. John went to his ornament case and pulled out something Constance had no idea was there. A large, soft square of cloth. "Swaddling clothes," he said. And he handed them to Sara, and then she sang, sweetly and quietly.
"Mary, let me hold her baby, her newborn son. Though I'd never be a mother, I felt like one. Mary, let me hold her baby, so she could rest. Ever since that night I held him, my life's been blessed. Those like me who can't have children still can be mothers. Something in his eyes convinced me I could serve so many others. Mary, let me hold her baby, so soft and warm. Mary, let me hold her baby,
Sara hummed quietly and rocked the imagined baby in her arms. John whispered to Constance, she single-handedly built the largest orphanage in ancient Israel and served there until the day she died. She died? You're telling me this woman's dead? She's just a spirit, but she's doing great work on the other side, I'm told. The other side, she said, of the veil, Connie Lou. Sometimes it's very, very thin.
Something in his eyes convinced me I could serve so many others. Mary let me hold her baby, so soft and warm. Mary let me hold her baby, and I was reborn.
Shh, he's asleep, Sara said. Then she walked over to Constance. You hold him for a while so I can visit with John. Then she placed the swaddling clothes in the nurse's arms. Constance thought that she should have felt silly holding that blanket, but she didn't. Instead, her heart began to swell with so much love, she thought it would burst. And for a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw a baby looking up at her. Without realizing what she was doing, she started to hum Sara's lullaby. And then a snowball hit the window and she awoke. Disoriented, she looked around and saw no one. She must have dozed off for a few minutes. She checked the clock. It was 5:30. She'd been asleep nearly 2 hours. How embarrassing, how unprofessional. She hurried to get her things and called a cab. While she was waiting for it to arrive, something on the Christmas tree caught her eye. It was an ornament she hadn't seen, a cloth bow made from swaddling clothes. Halfway home, Constance realized that in her rush to leave, she'd forgotten her notebook. When she got back to the door of the mansion, she decided she wouldn't knock, but would simply slip in. John would probably be asleep anyway. She quietly opened the door and tiptoed in. She saw Uncle John dancing around the Christmas tree. He was dancing to music coming from a small music box. It was reminiscent of something from a Christmas ballet, but it wasn't a tune she recognized. Constance remained out of view and watched John dance for a few moments. He was dancing with a partner who wasn't there. Every gesture, every glance, every movement made it clear that whoever it was he was remembering was someone very special. When the music box went silent, he bowed to his partner, kissed her hand, and took her by the arm over to the Christmas ornament case. From it, he took what looked like a corsage of dried flowers. Then, almost as if he was pantomiming, he pretended to pin it on her. John and his imaginary partner danced their way around the room toward the tree. If they were dancing to music, only they could hear it. During one of his turns, John saw that he was being watched, and it broke the spell. He just stood there looking at Constance, sad but not angry that the magic of the memory had faded. She was my only true love. I have lived long enough to say honestly that I have seen the great beauties of the world, but she was the greatest. Her eyes were windows to a stunningly beautiful soul. And she loved me. She saw things in me I couldn't see in myself. Over the centuries, I have listened as the world's finest composers have tried to capture in music the very essence of true love. For other loves, they may have succeeded, but for our love, no melody on earth has ever come close. He stared at the corsage of dried flowers in his hand and went on. In all these years, the only time I really wished I could die was when she did. Only two things kept me going. One was that she made me promise that I'd finish my mission with honor no matter what. And the other was the hope that we shall be together forever someday. I do pretty well the rest of the year, but when I dance our Christmas dance and place her corsage on the tree, I do miss her. There was a loud honk. The cab driver was still waiting. Constance had to go, but with all her heart she wished she could stay with him so he wouldn't be alone. She waved at the taxi to wait, and then walked over to the music box and wound it up. When it began to play, she stood before her patient and asked, "May I have this dance?" He pinned the corsage on her crisp white uniform, and then they danced. It should have been more difficult for Constance than it was. She didn't know how to dance. She could barely remember the last time she had danced, and what a disaster it had been. But this dance wasn't for her. It was for him. She'd been a prisoner to her own concerns, her own insecurities, and her own problems most of her life. But tonight, in the arms of a lonely old man, love was setting her free. She'd had so little experience with love in her life, she didn't know what to call it. But the man she was dancing with knew exactly what kind of love it was. Pure. When their dance was over, she unpinned the corsage and placed it on the tree. And then, as she was leaving, she kissed Uncle John on the cheek. As she rode home, she wasn't filled with anxieties about what she had done. Even though she'd just danced with a patient and kissed him, she didn't feel the slightest hint of guilt or awkwardness or concern. She was at peace, totally at peace. And for the first time in her life, she knew what that meant. When Constance had finished her dinner and washed the dishes, she sat in her favorite reading chair and just looked around the room. This room needs something, she thought. Maybe I should go out and get a small Christmas tree, she muttered half aloud. It looks kind of drab in here. When the words left her mouth, it was as if the furniture she'd lived with for so long cried out in protest. "What are you saying?" the room seemed to ask. "This is what you are. You can't change. What are you thinking? You can't put up a little tree and disguise who you are. Constance, don't get caught up in your patient's insanity. Be professional. Be competent." With this, her peaceful feelings vanished. Suddenly she felt a knot in her stomach. What had she done? She'd gone against her better judgment. She'd allowed a patient to seduce her. She'd lost her professional distance. She'd compromised her standards of competence. She had failed, and she felt sick. Now what was she going to do? She'd have to tell Mr. Halifax. Oh, how humiliating. What would he think? What would become of her? She could lose her job. No, she wouldn't tell anyone. But she'd ask for Mr. Halifax to replace her immediately, and she'd fill in for whatever nurse he chose. She'd do it in the morning. First thing. There now. Take a few deep breaths, she told herself. That's better. Everything's going to be all right. Next morning, Mr. Halifax was already in a meeting. She left the phone number at the mansion and pleaded with his secretary to have him return the call as quickly as possible. She arrived at the home of Uncle John precisely on time, paid the cab driver, and walked very slowly to the entrance. There was no skipping, no dancing, no childlike excitement. She was painfully aware of who she was and what the realities were. Reluctantly, she rang the front doorbell. "Good morning," Uncle John said cheerfully. "Sleep well?" Constance didn't answer. "You just missed a call from your boss." John seemed to sense something was wrong. Connie Lou, are you feeling okay?" "I've been better," was all she could say. "Well then, I've got just the thing." John was beaming. "An old herbal tea remedy that works every time. I'll make some up for you right away." "Please don't bother, I'll be fine." She knew her performance was unconvincing, but it was the best she could do under the circumstances. "You're worried about something, Connie Lou. It's written all over your face." "What is it?" "It's nothing." "Is it about last night? Are you feeling funny about last night?" How does he always know everything, she wondered. Can psychotics read minds? "Connie Lou, can I tell you something? That was one of the dearest things anyone has ever done for me. Come here, I want to show you something." He walked her over to the Christmas tree and waited for her to discover his surprise. Because she didn't know what she was supposed to be looking for, it took her a minute to recognize what Uncle John wanted her to see: the newest ornament on the tree. It was a red cross. "I made this last night after you left. You know, I met Florence Nightingale, served with her, in fact, for a few months." Constance rolled her eyes. Didn't he ever give up? "But last night," Uncle John continued, "you showed this patient of yours compassion that matched anything I ever saw Florence do. So in your honor, I made this red cross and placed it on the tree." Constance noticed that the ornament was placed very near the corsage. "So what's the song that goes with it?" she asked, almost sarcastically. "Only you can write that one, Connie Lou." "But I don't write songs." "Oh, yes, you do. We all do. It's just harder for some of us to let them out, that's all." "Let them out?" "Out of our hearts," he said. "We may not all be George Friedrich Handel, but every meaningful experience we ever have has a song that accompanies it, and we write it in our hearts. And you're writing the one that goes with this ornament right now." "I'm writing a song right now?" Constance already knew this man was crazy, but he was really proving it now. "Not consciously, Connie Lou. It's all happening inside, and when you're willing to let it out, it will be heard." Constance just looked at her patient for a long time. She had no words. She was searching for some, but none came. How do you reason with someone who's lost all touch with reality, she wondered. And more importantly, why was she trying? He was beyond hope, as far as she could see. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "Do what?" "Make up all these stories about how long you've lived and the people you've known, and how everybody writes songs in their hearts. It's not normal. It's strange. It's not reality. It's not true." She had more to say, but Uncle John interrupted her. "Now just wait a minute. What I've told you may be strange, I grant you that, and it may not be normal or seem real to you, but I told you before, I tell the truth." "Well, I guess all truth is relative," she acknowledged. John got a bit stern with her for a moment. "Listen, Connie Lou, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean it can't be true. I can respect the fact that you don't believe what I've been telling you, but that doesn't mean it isn't so. The problem with a lot of people who've only been around a few decades is that they cling so tightly to the things they learned yesterday that they can't reach out for the new things that will change their tomorrows." Uncle John paused. He knew it would take a moment for what he'd said to sink in, and he wanted Constance to think about it before he continued. She did. And then she asked, "But how can you know if something's true when it flies in the face of everything else you've ever learned?" "That's why we have hearts, Connie Lou. If we'll let them, they are our true teachers. We just have to listen." "To our hearts?" "That's right, to our hearts." John pointed to the Christmas tree to help him make his point. "This season is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. How could anyone believe the story of Christmas and of a Savior coming to save us, born of a virgin, were it not for a willingness to listen to our hearts? I met a woman, a lot like you, who learned this for herself one evening when she happened to see Joseph and thought she recognized him.
He was working late one evening with the wood he knew so well. When she thought she recognized him, though at first she couldn't tell, as she humbly begged his pardon, a strange sadness swelled inside. When she asked, "Aren't you the father of the man they crucified?" Then the carpenter repeated what he'd said so many times. He said, "I was not his father. He was mine." Then he humbly went on working with his worn and calloused hands. Though she did not ask more questions, he knew she did not understand. So he asked if she would help him. He saw her answer in a glance. And then she did the chores he asked her. And she was grateful for the chance. Then they talked for hours of Jesus and how he knew he was divine. He said, "I was not his father. He was mine." How could one so foolish and so flawed ever hope to raise the Son of God? Then he spoke of the misgivings he had had 1,000 times, and how Jesus found the tender moments to let him know he'd done just fine. Then the carpenter recited the greatest truths he'd ever learned, and testified they came from Jesus. And then her heart within her burned. Then they embraced as she departed. Joseph told her one more time, "Tell them I was not his father. Tell them he was mine. No, I was not his father. He was mine."
John took from his ornament case a small replica of a cradle, which he told Constance looked very much like the one Joseph had built for Jesus. And then he respectfully hung it on the tree and turned to Constance. "In all my years on earth, I have seen time and time again that those who are happiest are those who have the courage to follow their hearts, to believe what otherwise would be unbelievable, to seek the light, to find the truth.
Somewhere beneath the glitter that comes this time of winter, in many souls there is a cry. They may not clearly say it, but in their hearts they pray it, and you can see it in their eyes.
I cannot find my way. I cannot find my way. I cannot find my way at all. There are so many voices, so many different choices. I cannot find my way at all.
There were 3 kings who followed the star of Bethlehem. They came from afar to praise and honor him. The light which beckoned them to seek the Lord of men. It calls to you, and it calls to me.
We cannot find our way. We cannot find our way. We cannot find our way at all. There are so many choices, so many different voices. We cannot find our way at all.
We're not alone. We have a star that shines today. The love that he gave teaches us how and shows the way. The light is clear to see if we have faith and believe. 3 kings found the Lord, and so can we.
We cannot find our way. We cannot find our way at all.
3 kings found the Lord, and so can we.
There are so many choices, so many different voices. We cannot
3 kings found the Lord, and so can we. And if you've lost your way, that light burns bright today, and it will shine eternally, eternally. 3 kings found the Lord, and so can we.
We cannot find our way at all.
3 kings found the Lord, and so can we.
There are so many choices, so many different voices. We cannot find our way at all. Lord, help us find our way. We need to find the way. Lord, help
3
us find
kings
our way.
found the Lord, and so can we.
We need to find the way. Lord, help
3
us
kings found the Lord, and so can we.
to find the way. Lord, help
3 kings found the Lord, and so can we.
us find the way. Lord, help us find the way. We need to find the way. Lord, help us find the way.
The message of John's forgotten carol overwhelmed her feelings of despair and confusion, and for the first time since her dance the night before, there was harmony in her soul again. When John invited Constance to place the star atop the tree, she agreed willingly. To reach the top of the tree, she would need a stepladder, so John went to get one for her. While he was gone, she got a chance to study the star more carefully. She noticed that it had a pearl in its very center, framed by 4 indentations. 3 of those were filled with what looked like a ruby, an emerald, and a sapphire. The 4th indentation was empty. When John returned with the ladder, he explained that the pearl at the center represented the Lord, and the 3 gems represented the 3 kings who sought him, found him, and honored him. The empty space, he told her, was for all of us who needed to follow their example. John then steadied the ladder as Constance placed the crowning ornament on the tree. She wanted it to be perfect, so she asked John to step back a few feet and let her know if it looked straight. When a knock came from the front door, John excused himself to answer it. From her vantage point on the ladder, she couldn't clearly see or hear everything that was happening, but what she did hear frightened her. She caught little pieces of phrases. "You'll have to come with us. Did you really think you could get away with this again? You have the right to remain silent." Constance went numb for a moment, frozen on the ladder. She didn't know what to do. After a moment or two, a policeman entered. "You must be the nurse from the hospital," he said a bit gruffly. "What are you doing here? What's going on, officer?" she called down to him. "Well, the neighbors called us because they were concerned that strangers were in the house," he said routinely. "But this is his house." "I gotta hand it to the guy. He's clever, but he's done this before. Kinda gave himself away this time." "What do you mean he's done this before?" "Oh, a couple of years ago in Granville, a man sent a wire to a nearby hospital saying that if they would send a nurse to care for their aged uncle, they'd get a donation when they returned." Constance turned as white as the snow outside. "What happened?" "Well, from what the Granville sheriff told us, he didn't hurt anybody or steal anything. In fact, the crazy old coot even gave a few bucks to the hospital." "So why did he do it?" "Who knows? Maybe he didn't want to spend Christmas alone." The officer shook his head at the craziness all around him. "Look, I'll need you to come down to the station with me for some routine questioning, and then we'll let you go. Sorry for the inconvenience." "What's going to happen to him?" "Oh, he's probably homeless or senile. We'll let him spend a night or 2 at the jail until we can find out if he's got any relatives. And then, if no charges are pressed against him, we'll try to find an institution that will take him." She gathered her things and rode to the county jail with the officer. She was lost in a world of her own. At first she was in a state of shock. Then she tried to put the pieces together, and then she started getting angry. Angry at John for playing such a cruel, practical joke on her. Well, maybe it wasn't meant to be a joke, but it was. She felt used, deceived, taken advantage of, and the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. After arriving at the station, she asked if she could see John before she left. It took some doing, but the officer arranged for her to have a few minutes with John. "Would you like me to be there as protection?" he asked her. "For me or for him?" "Well, you both look pretty harmless to me, but in case you have a problem, just holler. I'll be right outside the room." She entered the cubicle where John was sitting and stood in front of him. She wasn't planning on sitting down. She was going to tell him a thing or two and then make a dramatic exit. She just wanted to let the volcano that was bubbling inside her erupt. "Well, Mr. Truth, this must be a little awkward for you. Just when you had me right where you wanted me, someone pulled back the curtain and there you stood, like the mighty Wizard of Oz, revealed as the fraud and scam artist you really are. So tell me, is it exciting to play with someone's heart and mind? Does it give a feeling of power?" John just sat listening quietly and somehow understandingly. "I wasn't playing, Connie Lou." "You weren't? Then what the hell were you doing to me?" Constance was stunned to hear herself swear. Part of being disciplined was choosing her words carefully and professionally. But this just came out, and she couldn't stop it. "You took advantage of me, just like my mother. You made me something I didn't want to be." As the words were flowing, so were her tears. "And then you left me. You lied to me, and then you left me." She was sobbing inconsolably. "I hate you for hurting me." John reached out to comfort her. "Don't touch me, Mother. I'm furious with you." Those words lingered in the air and mingled with the sound of her crying. A flood of hurt poured out, and then she buried herself in John's shoulder. As she wept, he gently stroked her hair and whispered, "Let it all out, Connie Lou. Let it all out." As much as she was hurting, she was cleansed somehow, as if she was washing out an infection in the deepest part of her soul. When the reservoir of tears was empty, she began to breathe normally. John held her by her shoulders. "You can start to heal now, Connie Lou," he said tenderly. The guard came in to take John away. Constance wanted a few more minutes, but she couldn't have them. John asked her for a favor. "Could you get my ornaments for me, please?" he said, and then he was gone. Constance didn't know if she could do what he wanted, so she asked the officer if it was okay to return to the house. He smiled and said he'd arrange for someone to take her. When she returned to the house and picked up the suitcase, a flap inside the lid of the case fell open, and out spilled what looked like several newspaper articles and an envelope. In the envelope was a cashier's check made out to the Fullerton Hospital for $5,000. Constance wondered where a man like John could have come up with the money. She hoped it wasn't stolen. The newspapers were in various shades of aging yellow, but the headlines carried similar themes. One article from the Granville Gazette, December of 1988, was cleverly headlined, "Deck the halls with boughs of folly. It appears that Santa isn't the only one who sneaks into people's houses to surprise them at Christmas time. Last week in the suburb of..." Constance didn't like this article because the tone was too facetious. She picked up another, this one, a bit older, from a small town paper in Missouri. The article was dated December 27th, 1974. "Butcher claims con man taught him forgotten carols. A local butcher claims that a mysterious customer taught him Christmas carols about forgotten parts of the Christian holiday." She read article after article in newspapers all across North America. This guy had really been around. He must have been fairly young when he started doing this, she thought, after she read the article from the Des Moines Register of December 1948. But she noticed that he was referred to as a dignified but aging gentleman. There were several articles during the war years and the Depression, and they all told the same basic story. Yet the tone of the articles during those difficult years was different. Like this headline from a New York newspaper in the 40s. "New York family claims their own miracle on 34th Street. The actual paper of the articles became more and more fragile and in darker shades of amber. Constance felt compelled to read every one, but as the dates on the papers approached the turn of the century, she got chills, and then she saw something that changed everything. It wasn't a particularly clever or different headline from all the rest, and the story was certainly familiar enough. But the date on the paper was December 29th, 1805. Constance carefully returned the articles to their special compartments in the suitcase. Then she proceeded to take the ornaments off the tree. As she held each one, she was enveloped in the memories and the melodies that accompanied them. She rediscovered the significance and meaning of each one: the star, the cradle, the bow made of swaddling clothes, the corsage of dried flowers, the composer's pen, the shepherd's flute, the entrance to the inn, all filled her heart again as she placed them in the leather and wood case. There wasn't a place for the newest ornament, the red cross, and there wasn't a melody that instantly came to mind as she held it, but one was there, and without her knowing how it happened, it was set free.
I thought I'd seen all the lights and sung all the songs. I felt the holiday lasted a bit too long. I never shed any tears when Christmas was through, until I celebrated one with you. And now I cry the day that I take the tree down. I want the season to last all year round. When I'm surrounded by these memories, it's almost like you're here with me. It's strange how things are changed when touched by love. We treasure things we never thought much of. I cry the day that I take the tree down. I want the season to last all year round. And I am dreaming of Christmases when we'll be together again.
She could hardly finish the song for the tears. She'd never cried tears like this before. They were cleansing tears that carried a lifetime of unexpressed feelings. They were tears of love lost and love found. They were tears of understanding all she had missed, and tears of gratitude for all she could now receive. Not knowing whether to keep her red cross or to place it in the case, she decided at length to place it with the others. She felt that it would be an honor to have something of herself in such company. When Constance returned to the jail, she asked if she might see John one last time and give him his treasured Christmas ornaments. They said she couldn't because he was gone. Gone? How could he be gone? The policeman said that someone who claimed to be like family to him came and got him out. He thought her name might have been Sara, but he couldn't remember. But he left this for you, the policeman said as he handed her an envelope. Constance quietly opened and read it. My dearest Connie Lou, thanks so much for everything. You'll never know how much knowing you has enriched my life. I want you to have the ornaments as my Christmas present to you. After so many years of traveling, I feel they need a permanent home. I too am dreaming of Christmases when we'll be together again. Merry Christmas, John. He had heard her song, her forgotten carol. He had heard it long before she knew it had been written. She tenderly held the note and pressed it against her heart.
All I ever wanted, all I ever dreamed of, everything I hoped, and all the things I prayed for, couldn't hold a candle to what I've been given. I've been given what I need. A mansion on a hill, or love like in the movies. Perfect little dreams where no one has a problem. Instead of all those things I thought I really wanted, I've been given what I need. Even when I didn't understand, when I thought you had no heart. Thank you for rejecting my demands and always giving me the better part. All I ever wanted, all I ever dreamed of, everything I hoped, and all the things I prayed for, couldn't hold a candle to what I've been given. I've been given what I need. All I ever wanted, all I ever dreamed of, everything I hoped, and all the things I prayed for, couldn't hold a candle to what I've been given. I've been given what I need.
The next morning, Constance got a chance to tell Mr. Halifax what had happened, and she presented him with a check for $5,000. She then informed him that she'd like to work Christmas Day and give some of the nurses a chance to be with their families. She surprised him again when she asked if she could help in the maternity ward. On Christmas Day, there were 3 glorious miracles at Fullerton Hospital, and Constance was there for all 3. During one of her breaks, she just watched the new fathers and mothers marvel at their newborn children. One of the fathers recognized her as the nurse who had helped with the delivery of his son. "You were there, weren't you? How can I possibly thank you for being with us when you probably wanted to be home with your family? Well, this really is an incredible day for us, and I'm so grateful for everything. And I wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas, Miss... He struggled to see her name tag, but it was covered by a blanket she had over her shoulder. "My name is Constance," she said almost automatically. But she paused, and as she looked into the eyes of the young father, his sweetness reminded her of a dear friend, and she smiled. "But my friends call me Connie Lou."
He did not come in glory when he first came to earth. Most of the world ignored his humble birth. But the heavens were singing in celestial harmony, so the light of his love could shine on me. So the light of his love could shine through me. Arise, arise,
Arise, arise,
arise, arise. Arise. Let's all arise. Brothers and sisters, arise. Arise and shine forth. Let us add to the flame that burns brightly in the hearts that bear his name. And the torch that's a standard for the nations all to see is the light of the word shining through me. We are standing for something, prayerful in all things, comforting those that mourn. We are gathering Zion, we can rely on this refuge from the storm. We are strengthened on every side in the light that we cannot hide. We are united, spirits ignited, feeling the fire inside. Arise, shine forth, and we'll add to the flame that burns brightly in the hearts that bear his name. And the torch that's a standard for the nations all to see is the light of the world that shines in you and me. It's the light of the world